Right, we are right on time. Welcome, everyone. I know we had a large number of folks register for this lunch hour here in the Central Time Zone webinar on So You Think You Can Interview. We're so glad you're all here. If you haven't had a chance, if you would like to share in questions, you can either make it visible to just the panelists or to everyone, but we would love to know, what do you hope to learn more today during our time together? And I'll quickly introduce myself and then be quiet, and I'm going to turn it over to the experts at hand. My name is Brooke Schumann. I am the Associate Director in the Alumni Relations Office, and I'm really excited to work with two of my colleagues on campus and draw from their resources, because in this time, I guess this would be appropriate at any time, but definitely during the wild world of 2020, we're getting a lot of questions on interviewing, and especially in the virtual interviewing space. And so I'll turn it over to my colleagues to have them introduce themselves today, and we'll dive right into content. And welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terrence Hood, and I serve as Assistant Director for Alumni and Student Athletes in the Center for Career and Professional Development.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rachelle Blackwell. I am in the role of Assistant Vice Chancellor of Human Resources, and I have been at TCU for the past 6 years. Actually, my anniversary was like Monday, so.
Awesome. And I've been here for 12 years. Yay.
Oh, wow.
Long time.
I don't want to count.
All right, well, let me share my screen, everyone. We're going to dive right on in, as Brooke was saying, to our content here. All right, so just quality check. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Have to check on everything these days. Navigate the world of Zoom. Welcome, everyone. We're excited and delighted to share with you just some tips for virtual interviewing. So you think you can interview, so whether you are new to virtual interviewing or you've had some experience, the pandemic has changed a lot with how we do things. The in-person interviews were once common, now they are not, but there are still some tested and tried methods that are pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID, that are tried and true no matter what you're interviewing for. So we don't want to really magnify the negative in the pandemic. We want to magnify the positives and turn this into an opportunity to learn more about how to present yourself in a professional manner. So let's dive on into some of our talking points here. And we want this to be as interactive as possible and conversational as possible. So we want to cover some basics, aspects of virtual interviewing in terms of types of platforms, the different types of virtual interviews. So Rachelle's going to cover the different aspects of virtual interviewing. Then we're going to jump right into 3 quick tips to rock or ace your virtual interview. So Rachelle's going to cover that. I'm going to be chiming in, offering some other insights. And then we're going to talk about how to prepare, how to plan, and how to execute. So there are 3 phases with any interview, no matter what you're interviewing for, graduate school, whether it's an internship or a full-time role. How do you prepare? And then how do you plan? And then how do you execute? And then we're going to jump into something very, very interesting. Inappropriate questions, common questions, behavioral questions. We're going to cover all those things, and then also hear from you in terms of what types of questions have you received that might have been hard to deal with, and give you some strategies. I'm going to also give you an example of a well-crafted example of an answer given with the STAR method, and we'll cover some context what the STAR method means, and then we're going to jump right into, so again, the tricky questions and appropriate questions, how you might respond to them, and at the end, we're going to do a little mention of a new resource that we have called Big Interview, which is an online interviewing and recording platform for TCU alumni. So thank you, Brooke, for our first polling question. What do you hope to gain from our conversation? Please continue to add that in the chat. Someone mentioned confidence level, how to handle a career change. We're going to cover that today, but please continue to add in the chat as things come up as well. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Rachelle. We'll jump right into our virtual interviewing conversation.
Well, let's hop right into it. So some of these things may seem a little bit simple or simplistic, but we're going to start right into what is a virtual interview. because we assume that a virtual interview is a Zoom meeting sort of like this, and you have individuals talking back and forth. You can have a live virtual interview where you are asking questions, you're seeing the person on the screen and you're having direct dialogue, or they've also added the asynchronous interview method, meaning it's a pre-recorded interview. So they may ask that you get on Zoom and record yourself on Zoom asking some questions that they have sent over to you previously, and then you have to record that session and upload that to whatever platform they use. So just be prepared that it may not always be a one-on-one live conversation. It may very well be a recording of some sort, and it may not always be Zoom, and we'll jump into that also. So just being aware of what type of interview they're asking for, and when they call you and say, hey, we really want to hear what you have to say, be sure you ask them the questions of what type of Zoom interview, what type of virtual interview you're about to encounter. Next slide, Brett. Oh, Terrence, sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
Right.
Great.
First things first, this is going to seem very simple, but these are the things that get people a little uncomfortable during their virtual interview because they don't check all of these items. Tip number 1, secure and double check your technology. Make sure your Wi-Fi is working. I know that's really hard to say because during this time, every time I'm at home, it seems like something happens to the Wi-Fi and I can't get on or it knocks me off. So just check it in advance to make sure it's there. And then also when you get the information from the organization that you're interviewing, be sure to read and understand which video conferencing platform they're using. Here at TCU, we've gotten really comfortable because we use Zoom. But everyone doesn't use Zoom. So be sure to be watchful if they're using Skype, Zoom, Google Hangout, Microsoft Teams, because you don't want to download Zoom to your phone or to your computer and we're using Microsoft Teams. So make sure you familiarize yourself with all the video conferencing software so that you're aware how to get to them, and then you can work on how to work them later. But just knowing there are other things outside of Zoom and just being aware that and I guess I'm more passionate about this. It's happened to me a couple of times, not in an interview, but just in a meeting with different individuals. I think, okay, I'm going to hop on Zoom where I find out it's Microsoft Teams. I don't have that downloaded. So just be aware that happens. And then make sure you test your technology. This is very important because, yes, we all know with technology, things happen. And from day to day, we tend to be on mute. I'm always on mute when the meeting starts, or whatever the case may be, or my camera's not working. So just make sure you test your camera, your audio, and then your video conferencing software. That means, I guess it's kind of twice, but make sure you're downloading it and taking a look at it and understand the actual logon instructions that you have to use whenever you're getting ready for your interview, because you're already nervous and you don't want the uncomfortableness of not knowing where to go and what to do to add to that nervousness in your interview. If you do that a couple of days in advance, and oftentimes what we do here at TCU is our HR recruiters will reach out to individuals and say, if you need anything, let us know. They really mean that. So if you need them to help you test your, Google Hangout or test your Zoom, they will do that a day or so before the interview so that you're comfortable with using the technology. So, and many employers do have someone that you can call to help you through that process. All right, let's talk about tip number 2. This is a biggie. So let's say, okay, you tested all your technology, you know where to go, you know what platform to use, you are ready to start the interview. Be sure that you've identified a place in your space, whether it's your house or your office or wherever you decide to go, that's quiet, private, and well lit as possible. If you don't have that space in your home, you may want to check out the library. They have little study spaces, or maybe a community center also has a couple of different spaces. Even if you come to TCU, the library has small spaces you can use that are quiet, and you can close the door. You won't have an issue with the background. This has come up so many times in interviews where, yes, we know that, people are at home, so there's a potential for the dog to bark, you know, the lights flicker. If you have a Ring doorbell, it goes off like 100 times, like mine does every time I get on Zoom. We know things like that happen. We know we all have those items at our home as well. So just be sure it is as private and quiet and well lit as possible, because maybe you don't have the you can't leave because you have, you know, you're doing virtual learning with your children at home. We have a lot of us are in that space. So just making sure it's as quiet as possible. We do know things will happen, and we'll talk about how to recover when some of those things happen also. And don't get too comfortable. I'm going to give you just a real short story about an interview that it was not necessarily my interview that I know it took place, but there was an individual that interviewed for a major organization, major company, major. And they were in the bed during their interview. Now they were dressed, but you know when you see a headboard in the background. If you know you're interviewing for a very serious position and within, you know, you're at 5 other people on a call, you don't want individuals seeing your bed or your headboard, even if you're fully dressed. If you can help it. I mean, I realize there's some people who may stay in a studio apartment, so you may end up seeing their bed. But I would say just find a chair and not sit in the bed, because that has happened. And make sure you have lights on. I mean, it's not time to create a mood when, you know, you're in your room and lights are off and nobody can see your face. And if you have children that are on virtual learning, my son always, all you can see is the top of his head in all of his video, because he said, well, they said I have to have my camera on, so just show on the top of my head. So be sure you can see your whole face, and that there's no shadow where you kind of going in and out of the shadow when you're doing your interview. I said, log on 15 minutes before. Yes, it may be uncomfortably quiet and you may be just staring and smiling at each other. It's okay. You're on, you're ready. You don't have to worry about your technology messing up. You're already there. They see your face. They know you're timely. It's okay if it's uncomfortable. Just put it on mute and just wait it out. And you'll be happy that you did, even though it will feel a little bit strange because everybody's staring at each other. And have your video on. This is not the time during the interview not to have your video on. So be sure you have your video on, logged on early, and it's okay. We're all gonna be quiet and feeling the same way. If I'm interviewing someone, I'm feeling the same way, like, hey, should I say something to him? So everybody's feeling that way. So don't feel uncomfortable. And then be prepared for the traditional questions. And Terrence is gonna take you through some of the ways to answer those questions. And we're also gonna talk about some of those non-traditional questions that may come up. And then also some questions that you should not answer if asked. All right, so just remember, rocking your interview, find a space that's quiet, well lit, doesn't have to be at your house if you can leave home. And if possible, I'm thinking about things that have happened here with us, don't do your interview from your car if you can help it. Now, there's sometimes we are in a pinch and it just happens, but if you can help it, try to find a space where you can sit and be looking directly into your camera, not in your car, because things happen in the car too, and just a kind of an odd space. But if you have to, you do what you got to do to get the job, but try very hard not to be in your car. I have like 100 stories about where not to be, so thanks, Terry. You can go to the next slide. All right, so I was doing this before this call today. Be sure you have a neat, distraction-free background. As neat as possible. Like I mentioned about being in the bedroom and the bed. If you live in a small space, nothing's wrong with that. Just be sure you've at least hid the clutter before your interview starts. I have this problem really bad. This next tip: be sure you're looking at the camera. I tend to have, and I'll be honest with you. So if I'm talking in an interview space, I try not to look at myself. So I might turn off my own video if I can. So I can't see myself. And I can only see you guys, or put it on the gallery view where I'm not looking at myself the whole time. But try to face the camera and look directly into your screen, because you don't have to watch yourself talk, but we all do it. It's okay. And the other thing is practice, practice, practice. It feels odd. This whole virtual thing feels a little bit odd, but practice looking into your camera, record yourself. It is sometimes it feels uncomfortable, because whenever I record myself, I feel uncomfortable watching it back, but it does help a lot. So take your Zoom, your Google Hangout, all of them have a record feature. Look into the camera and record yourself answering questions before your interview. If your platform has a tutorial, take a look at the tutorial and they'll take you through all the steps. And then, as I mentioned earlier, just reviewing your logon instructions once you get them from your organization you're interviewing with. And don't be shy to ask them questions about who you're interviewing with, and talk about the platform, how you should prepare. Ask all the questions ahead of time. Nobody's going to think why he or she is asking these questions. Be sure to ask as many questions as you need of the recruiter or whomever is calling you, to prepare for the interview so that you're ready for that interview space. So I think we have another polling question if we haven't asked that already. Yeah, if you guys would just put in if you have participated in a virtual interview, or if not, I think even though it was here for the pandemic, I think it's here to stay. I'd be honest with you. I think it's going to be a great way when we used to do phone screens, because in my role, I actively manage the talent acquisition team here. And I believe this is the way we're going to phone screen. And it's not phone screen, but we're not going to have to call people on the phone. We're going to actually Zoom probably as our first contact with someone. So it's probably here to stay. And it may not be Zoom, but whatever that is, I'm sure it will stay. So it looks like about 53% have never had a virtual interview, and about 48% of you have. That's pretty good. And just knowing that if you have, great. And if you haven't, it's a great time to start because it's not going away.
And Rachelle, if I might just add a little bit, I'm looking at the picture on the slides.
Yeah.
This young man has on his headsets. Just make sure that you test out your equipment. I had a person doing an interview with me, and for whatever reason, I couldn't hear him. He sounded like he was whispering, but he had his own little earphones with a microphone, and it sounded much more clear. So whatever helps you to hear the interviewer well, vice versa, make sure that you test it out in advance. So you don't want to have to yell at the laptop, or you don't want to sound like you're whispering. But if you need to invest in some type of a headset or microphone, just to make sure that you're conveying yourself clearly and being heard clearly.
And thank you for adding that. And the other thing I want to add for those of you who have done virtual interviews, or if you have a virtual meeting, there are a lot of virtual backgrounds that you can use. They're fine as long as you have a blank wall or space behind you so that they can project. Because when you're using, yes, like Brooke's wall, but if you use a space like mine, it's not really conducive to a great interview because you'll go in and out of that virtual background and it'll look like you're being swallowed up by mountains or beach and we can't see your face. So if you're going to use a virtual background that many of these video conferencing platforms have, be sure that you're there's a blank wall behind you, or you could put a curtain there or something. But if you have a very varied surface behind you, your virtual background will look really odd and you'll go in and out. You'll be swallowed up by water or mountains. All right. I think the poll is still up there. Have you participated in the virtual interview poll is still showing.
It is? Okay, let me see if I can. Stop share. Okay, is it still there?
Yes.
Well,
while Brooke is taking away the first polling question, let's just talk real quickly. I don't need this slide often to talk about this, but let's talk about, it's not showing on their end. Let's see.
Yeah, you can X out of it, I think.
Glad somebody said that because I could see it on my end. Now I can't anymore. That's great. I appreciate it. When something goes wrong, as an individual that interviews individuals often, we know things are going to go wrong. Technology is unpredictable. It happens to us at work every single day. If you work on any of these platforms, something always happens and it may not be within your control. We know things are going to go wrong. Do not lose your cool. Do not think, oh, I bombed my interview, I'm not going to get the job. We know things go wrong. if you get kicked off, it's happened a lot, especially since virtual school has started. Because I think everybody's getting on at the same time, especially around the 9 o'clock hour. It tends to be very slow and people get kicked off quite often. It happens here at TCU as well. Just log back on. I got kicked off, and everybody will understand. We all get kicked off. It happens. Regain your focus and continue your interview. Don't stop in the middle. And, you know, feel like you just remember that we know things are going to happen. It's not going to go perfect. It may go perfectly. And if it does, that's awesome. But if it doesn't, just regain your focus. The person if they're like me, they'll say, hey, do you remember what question I was asking? Because we all get, and it happens to us all, and it's okay. It's really, really okay. And as this becomes a norm, I would say maybe over several years, maybe that will be a different company, a different feeling. But as we've all gotten used to this, we know that things go wrong. Be comfortable in that. Just regain yourself and keep going. And everyone understands. So you don't have to apologize profusely about your internet. Trust me, we all know how that works.
All right. Well, Rachelle, thank you so much for those tips on rocking your virtual interview. I'm going to just talk a little bit about, again, the different phases, and I'm just going to add a fourth phase here. So preparation, planning, execution, and follow-up. So the bullet you see here encompass all those phases, and I won't exhaust all of these, and some of these may be common knowledge, but might not be common practice. And so showing up early, as we said earlier, treat this just like a traditional interview. If you are going to a Deloitte or a Fidelity, you would get there at least 15 minutes early in most cases. My military background said on time is late, well, early is on time is late, late's unacceptable. So just like I would go to an in-person interview, about 15 minutes early, you want to log into your software or to your platform ahead of time. Give yourself some wiggle room. You don't want to log in directly on time because you want to allow for any errors or any bloopers. You want to give yourself a good cushion of time to navigate that. How should you dress? I recommend, just like you would for a traditional interview, you can't go wrong with the full business suit, business professional attire. A plan B might be business casual attire. I'd rather you be overdressed versus underdressed, but it might vary based on the industry. If you're ever in doubt, you could always contact your recruiter to ask what would be a more appropriate attire for this interview. But I, again, recommend going full business professional if you have it. But plan B would be something business casual. You definitely don't want to go all casual, no t-shirts and jeans, no polos, no hoodies, no sweatpants. You want to treat this as a professional interview because it is. Doing your homework on yourself comes before you do your homework on the job. So knowing yourself, knowing your skills, researching the company, there are so many ways to research even your interviewer. Most of us have a LinkedIn profile, so you could actually go on LinkedIn to learn a little bit more about your interviewer, do some homework, look for commonalities, mutual interest points, and then bring that up as appropriate during your actual job interview. Sending a thank you note, again, back in the traditional pre-COVID era, you might actually write a handwritten thank you note and hand it off to someone. Now, we recommend even doing maybe a thank you email with the interviewer within 24 to 48 hours. That comes into the follow-up phase. So after you prepare, plan, execute, and follow up, you want to make sure that you're asking a question to the interviewer. What are your next steps in your hiring process? You might be supposed to ask, will I hear something within 2 weeks or so? Because some people wonder, I haven't heard anything. I've interviewed and now it's crickets. But in your interview, you can actually ask them, what are your next steps in your hiring process? And how soon will I hear back? Will I hear back from someone? Just to get a sense of where they are in their timetable so there are no surprises. And try to make it as conversational as possible. One thing I learned over the years is that you don't always have to feel confident to be confident. All of us are nervous. And I'm actually nervous even now during this webinar. After doing this for 20 years, it never goes away. But again, confidence is key. So you want to come across as someone that's convincing with your skills. You have good research, you know yourself, you know the company, you know the role, and you know how you might fit into the role. So your confidence really comes based on your research of yourself, of the company, and of the position and how that all might fit together. I mentioned asking good questions. You want to try your best to have at least 3 good questions toward the end, because a trap might be the question they ask you, what questions do you have for me? There are some people who are very polite and say, oh, we covered everything. Thank you so much for asking. I don't have any questions. And my reaction is, first of all, utter shock. You actually had zero questions from me, not about the weather, not about my tie, not about the job, but you want to try to have good questions for the employer, which fall into 4 different buckets: the broad industry, the company, the position, or the person. So what questions do you have about the broad industry? What do you see this industry 5 years from now? In the midst of this pandemic, what's higher education? How are they responding to the pandemic? So you might use kind of current events, current issues to frame questions around the broad industry or about the company itself. What do you see Deloitte in the next 5 years? Or use your research to craft your question. So based on what I've seen on Google or on Glassdoor or on LinkedIn, could you tell me more about? So you don't want to go in there blind. I talked to Fidelity Investments years ago, and it says someone came to an interview and said, "Y'all do financial services, right?" And though you're probably smiling, but that was an actual question. It should have been a statement, not a question. You do financial services, and so that person clearly did not do their homework. They had no clue. So you definitely want to know a little bit about the industry, who they serve, a little bit about their competitors, so that you are well informed and well prepared. And then as you think about your skills, try to give good examples of your skills. Learn that your answers can either be fact or opinion. So if I'm a stranger to you and I'm an interviewer, we're getting to know each other. So as you give skills and you give stories, try to back those up with good, solid examples. So you don't tell me what you usually do, tell me what you actually did. It's very, very subtle. Well, I'm always the guru, I'm always the go-to person, but always and usually, I'm a stranger. How do I know that's a fact? Well, if you give me a good example to provide evidence, that makes your answer more factual and more convincing. And again, for the avoids, some things are very common, but I recommend no food, no gum chewing. You may keep a bottle of water or a coffee nearby, but you want something that's going to be helpful, not distracting. No texting, of course. Use thoughtful pauses to reflect as you need to. One thing you don't want to try to do is rush into your answer. And so the answer comes down to how you react and how you respond. There are 2 parts. So people have good responses and sometimes they rush into it. No one's in a hurry. So if there's a tricky question you might get, why not take about 2 or 3 seconds to plan, reflect before you give an answer? So try not to rush yourself, and then try not to use any filler words like your ums, your yes, your likes. That could be distracting. I may have said several times during this webinar, but I'm mindful of it. So you don't want it to overtake your conversation because it could be distracting. Use a thoughtful pause, which means silence can be golden, not an to think. A thoughtful pause goes a long way.
Terrence, I wanted to add a little note, and having chaired a couple of search committees at this university and others, one of the things I wanted to add was about asking questions. And at one time when I was chairing a committee and someone was applying for an internal position, which those can be tricky all the way around because you know people, you maybe even know personally the person who's interviewing you. And one thing, one particular story was a woman who was an internal candidate for a position, highly qualified. She did a pretty good job with her interview, but when we were rounding things out and we were asking her if she had questions, she said, "No, I know everything about this job. I don't have any questions. I know." And it rubbed the search committee wrong because she hadn't been in this position, and it felt, it was a fine line of too confident. And, you know, as the search committee, we felt we were owed a question about what were our goals for the position, what were we hoping. Rachelle or Terrence, do you guys want to add anything about that, especially on internal, you know, still be prepared to ask questions for internal interviews?
Oh, absolutely. We get that a lot. I mean, here, even because people want to change departments, or even internally here in HR, people, or human resources, people want to change areas. Treat the interview like you don't know the people. That's very difficult because you do know them, but you want to treat the interview like you're just coming in for a job that this is your first time there, and not assuming they know anything about you and what you do and what your skill set is and what your qualifications are. So you want to convince them that you're the right person for the job, because the person who came before you, who's brand new, potentially, who may have interviewed before you came in, guns blazing, as they say, so, and ready for the interview. So you want to be taken as seriously when you're applying for a position. And I think there was a question in the chat earlier, and Terrence commented on it. It said, how do you show confidence in your interview? And I think part of that confidence comes from doing what Terrence mentioned earlier about the do's and the do's. If you do your research about an organization and you have questions written out already, and you're prepared, I think, although you may still be nervous, then you're exuding confidence because you've done what you need to do. And are you going to answer everything absolutely, undoubtedly perfectly? No, maybe not, and maybe so. But I would say do as much homework about the company or the organization that you're interviewing, and you will appear confident when you're prepared. Confidence is being prepared and not, scrambling for paper, don't have a pen. And I tend to interview a lot of folks who are millennial age, and I know that maybe they don't take notes on paper like I do. I always have paper with me. Perhaps they take notes on their iPad or on their phone. If you take notes, I think you just let the interviewer know, hey, I'm going to take notes. Let me know if it's too distracting or something. Because I think letting someone know I want to take notes about this organization is very, very important, because I think that's a great sign for me as an interviewer. I'm like, wow, okay, that's good. But if you come and say, hey, I want to take notes, but I don't have a pen, I don't have paper, my phone is beeping in my purse or my pocket, or I think just being prepared as much as possible for preparation beforehand will give you the appearance of confidence, because you won't be fumbling and looking for things as you're going through the interview process. So.
And Brooke, back to your comment on the questions for the employer. I've learned that employers sometimes are more impressed with their questions than just your answers. Like for me, after I've interviewed for jobs here at TCU, I'm like, she had great questions. And the answers, I love that. But again, it's all about what you know about the company, and then having just questions about the industry, the company, the role itself, or the person. For example, people have LinkedIn profiles, so maybe someone is at a job that you're applying to, maybe they started there. Could you mention that? I see that you were an analyst. Tell me what it took for you to be successful. So many people have their career history on LinkedIn. So back to researching your interviewer, could that be an opportunity to plug in your research into learning more about that person's experience? So I want to talk a little bit about some of the common questions and then behavioral questions. So again, our common questions that people might be aware of: tell me a little bit about yourself. That's very common, open-ended. That's a time to talk about who you are in relation to the job itself. So key skills, a little bit about your background, kind of summarize highlights from your resume, not repeating the resume, but going into more detail about the relevant skills or achievements that relate to the position. So it's about maybe 5, 10, 15-second elevator pitch. Some of you might be familiar with that. What are your biggest strengths? What's your biggest weakness? So with the strengths question, as I mentioned earlier, try to go into an example. It's very, very subtle. Some people will tell me a strength and then they'll stop. Now, the question has two parts. What's your biggest strength? But what's an example? Everyone doesn't ask for an example. But when I hear someone tell me that my biggest strength is my ability to go above and beyond what's expected, for example, it segues nicely. I never asked for an example, but if you give an example, it takes it from opinion to fact. So if you say you go above and beyond, that's an opinion because I'm a stranger, I don't know your experience. When you provide those good examples, that goes full circle, it's more factual, and it's also more convincing. So do inventory of some good examples, and also the platform I'll show you later, Big Interview, allows you to do an answer builder. So as you think about archiving good examples, you can use Big Interview to save your stories and archive your stories, and you can practice saying those on camera as you respond to various questions. Biggest weakness, tell me about something that you're working on improving. So as you give a weakness, see it as an area of improvement that you're working on over time. So as you think about things like, for example, someone might say, well, when it comes to group settings, sometimes I'm not as assertive, or I can be shy in front of groups, but what I'm doing to improve is, so you want to go full circle, tell me what you have done, what you are doing, or what you could do just to improve. So I'm not where I want to be, but I'm not where I used to be. I've made progress, or this is no longer an issue for me. I'm joining Toastmasters, so I'm building up my communication skills. I'm being more assertive in meetings. I'm volunteering for assignments. So people know that we're not perfect, but you want to make sure that your weakness is not a red flag, not something detrimental to you doing the job, but also something that's very authentic and just a genuine area of improvement that you're working on over time. And then for the behavioral questions, use the STAR method. Describe a time you went above and beyond what was expected. Describe a time you took initiative. So when we think about those questions, you want to tell a good story. Again, it's specific. It's not general, not what you always do, but what you actually did. And then try your best to use the STAR method to give good structure to your example. And so what I would like to do now is show you guys a quick little video of a sample answer to the STAR method question, and then why employers typically would like this particular answer. Show my screen here. And Brooke, please tell me if you see everything you need to see. Alrighty.
So far, so good.
All right, and tell me if the sound works as well.
The example.
In my current role as an assistant account manager, I support my boss on our company's biggest corporate account, which brought in $2 million in revenue this year. Recently, my boss was traveling and I got a frantic call from Ray, our client contact, that he was not able to log into our system to run reports that he needed by the end of the day. Now, this was a Friday at 3 p.m. and my boss was on a plane to London. Ray was very upset when he heard that my boss was not available, and I knew I had to figure out a way to help him or things could get ugly.
This situation description jumps right into the action. We're not going into a lot of detail about who Ray was, the history of the system, nothing that's not relevant. Another good thing about this story is that it's got some nice urgency and drama. If you can inject that into your stories, that's going to help you keep their attention. Now on to A, approach.
The first thing I did was apologize to Ray about the inconvenience. I gave him a chance to vent a bit and reassured him that I would do whatever was humanly possible to resolve the problem for him. I called our help desk, but the technician told me that the issue would have to go into the queue, and she was very busy. So I decided to go wait outside the office of our customer support director, the technician's boss, until he could see me. I explained the situation and expressed how important it was for us to find a solution as soon as possible for our #1 client.
Why we like it. This is a pretty good overview of what the candidate did and why, focusing on skills demonstrated. First, client communication skills, then sense of urgency, proactive problem solving, and persistence. Finally, taking the lead while the boss was away, and a focus on getting things done. Good stuff. Now, on to the results of our story.
I then set up a conference call with Ray and our customer support director. Working together, we were able to identify the cause of the problem, which was related to Ray's company's security settings. We adjusted the settings right there while we were on the phone, and Ray was then able to run his report and meet his deadline. Later that day, Ray sent an email praising me for my quick response, CCing my boss and the CEO of our company. Ray said I saved the day for him with my persistence and excellent customer service skills. Our CEO called me to congratulate me on my quick thinking and tell me to keep up the good work.
Lots of good stuff here. We solved the problem, the client was happy. We're actually quoting the client here. This is a great trick if you're someone who is more humble by nature and you have a hard time saying great things about yourself. Quote other people saying them. To me, this story presents this candidate as someone who's a strong fit for a job that requires customer service, communication, problem solving, quick thinking, being proactive. Lots of competencies here. So that gives you a good idea of what a good STAR story can do for you.
All right. All right. Are you seeing my slideshow again, Brooke? All right, very good. So hope that gives you guys just some ideas on how you might structure your stories for the START method: situation, task, action, result, approach, results, using specific example. And one thing I like about the story, there are lots of I statements in the story. What I did, not my manager, not my team. It's really focused on them, because you want to make sure that you convey what your contributions were, because they're going to hire you, not your team, not your manager. Nothing wrong with including team in the story, but focus more on your contributions and the example.
Consider.
My apologies. All righty. All right. Do you see my screen here, Brooke, my slide? Awesome. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about inappropriate questions here. And so we want to talk a little bit about some of the questions that you may receive over time. I don't think over the years I've never had these types of questions. They're very rare, but they do exist. These are questions that are inappropriate. They could be considered unethical / illegal. For example, do you have any kids? What kind of name is Hood? I graduated from TCU too. When did you graduate? Now, these questions could be just for conversation. Some people are not trained in unethical questions. Many are, and many companies are being more cautious because you don't want to discriminate for various reasons. But you want to, in the end, it comes down to a judgment call. If someone's asking you about kids, it could be conversational, or it could be something that might be a bias against hiring someone who might not have as much time to devote to their job. So again, these questions linger. I think that they're not as common. Rachelle, please definitely chime in, but we want to make sure that you're aware of these questions, and then especially how you might approach them in terms of answering them or not.
Thanks, Terrence. The one thing I've noticed is that that oftentimes gets us into a little bit of a sticky situation is, especially as a female, we tend to talk about our children, and where it seems like a very harmless conversation, especially with all that's going on right now. It's one of those questions that comes up often, and it comes, and it's not necessarily, maybe not a question, but I may say, oh, my son goes to, fill in the blank school. My son goes to PASS school, like, oh, so does my daughter. Oh, and that conversation goes on and on and on, where it seems very harmless. But in an interview, if I were a person who had a bias of some sort, because let's just say I don't like whatever school your kid goes to, I don't know, whatever the case may be. Or I only like high school kids, I don't like middle school kids. Whatever the case may be, people form biases that we can't control. So the one thing I just want to point out, if you are asked a question, you feel uncomfortable, let's just say it's around religion or your age, because as we grow older, people ask questions about, are you able to work that long? Can you walk far? Can you, we have to, walk across campus. Are you able to walk that far? Things happen, and the way to sort of, I guess, change the subject in a nice way, so that, because you're still interviewing, sometimes you may answer the question, but I would at that point steer away from the question immediately, to ask one of your questions that you brought, that you've prepared. Like, thanks for asking, let me ask you this question. So it's always nice to sort of a distraction from answering a question that that potentially they should not have asked. If it's something that's truly egregious, my advice would be get through the interview and still being as professional as you possibly can, answering their questions. And then if it's something that you felt was just out of line, that's the point to reach out to their human resources department and say, someone asked me about, my sexual orientation, or someone asked me about whether I was divorced. And make you feel uncomfortable. So I would say get through your interview if it's something that really is just outlandish, and then reach out to their human resources department if you get those really off questions.
Rachelle, I know recently you were giving a presentation to TCU employees about interviewing and appropriate questions and slippery slope questions or tricky questions. And I think often some of these things make you feel like you're getting to a more personable part of your interview. And so you think that, oh, they're really wanting to know about me personally, and you take that as a good sign. And one of the questions I remember we discussed was, hey, what do you like to do in your free time? What do you like to do on the weekend? And how that can go really the wrong way, and maybe like giving us some examples of how to answer that without disclosing something you shouldn't. And I think we're going to get into some of the responses. If you haven't had a chance, share in the chat with us about what are some tough questions that you've had, and we'll get Terrence and Rachelle's feedback.
Absolutely. Yeah, that tell me about yourself is a tough one. It sounds easy, but it gets a lot of people in trouble.
Yeah. Okay, we've had a question. Someone said, what would you do if you made an important business decision and a coworker challenged it? That's it.
If that was a question, I think that is the type of question individuals ask to see how you react under pressure or you react in a stressful situation. So I would always say, give an example when you really did handle yourself in a way that you're proud of, because we all have those moments when we've been faced with a stressful or a stressful situation. We may not have been as prepared as we would have liked to have been. So that's not the time to talk about when you had a face-off argument with a coworker and you slammed the phone down and because you knew you were right. You may have felt that way, but that's probably not the time to tell that story. But you can tell a story about when you had a terse or intense conversation and you had to de-escalate that conversation and really talk about what you did to be a part of the solution and not necessarily the argument itself or the disagreement itself. Really talk about the solutions you presented to get past that point for the good of the organization or for the good of your department.
Mm-hmm. That's good. We're getting lots of tricky questions in the chat here. Someone was asked, or someone mentioned that they're asked a lot of these questions on their application for the position. So if you don't, while they're voluntary, do you feel that would harm them in their application process if they don't answer some of these questions?
Typically, when you ask these questions on an application, it is at the end and it says these answers are optional or voluntary. You absolutely don't have to answer them because they are optional. And it should probably ask you about, race, age, sex, things of that nature. But in our TCU application, all those things are optional. You do not have to answer those. And it doesn't affect how we see, because the individuals who are your hiring managers do not see that information.
Okay. Let's see. Someone was asked, what is the hardest question you have ever been asked in an interview that you were not prepared for? And what was your answer?
The hardest question I've been asked in an interview.
Yeah, I think that person was asked that question.
Oh.
If that's, isn't that weird?
That's hard. I think
that's tricky.
That's a tricky question all the way around. And I have some go-to answers that I've just prepared over the years just from knowing. So, I mean, if someone asked me that question, I would probably revert back to the thing that Brooke just talked about because I give a presentation on it here at TCU. The hardest question I've been asked, and it sounds really silly, is tell me about yourself. Because when somebody gives it very open-ended like that, you don't know what they're asking for. You don't really know what they're asking for. Do you want to know about my professional? I always lean toward, these are my professional experiences because I think that's a safer route for anybody. But then the people say, well, no, what do you like to do in your free time? I'm going to have a canned answer. I know that sounds awful. I like to read and I like to exercise. I mean, I'm just going to have a canned answer for that question. And it sounds so awful because I think I also know about the, unconscious and conscious biases that people have against, because you may enjoy doing something that, no one else does. So I would just say, if you have a question about what's the hardest question you've ever been asked, I'm not sure what they're getting at with that, but Oh, I would just, maybe have a question that that made you feel uncomfortable and keep it in your hip pocket in the event that ever comes up. But I would probably say that probably won't come up very often. That's a difficult one to
The
even.
person that asked the question, she said her answer was, she was asked in an interview, if she was an animal, what would she be? So yeah, that would be.
And maybe in some of the creative positions.
Yeah.
That's one of them. And I'm trying to remember a question that someone asked me on an airplane once. And it was a really odd question. And it was just something about razor blades. That's all I remember. And I don't even know why we were having that conversation. It was an interview question. But if you were an animal, what animal would you be? Yeah. That
if, for TCU alumni who have been around the last 20 years, that really harkens to a frog camp or an RA or orientation leader question. That's what that reminds me of. Someone also gave the example, I think, that is big and broad. It's like, what brings you here? The job.
They may be asking if maybe you're coming from out of town, or if you're traveling to a position. That also can be tricky too, because you may be following a spouse or for some other reason. But if someone asked me what brings me here, it would really be my interest in the position, my interest in the company, my interest in the job.
Right.
I've always either want to work there because of whatever reasons that you want to work in that position.
Mm-hmm. And I know this next question that someone shared, Terrence, you've actually led some sessions in person back in the day when we could do that. Answering this, how do you answer when the interview asks you about a 2-year gap of employment? And this person references an illness, but I know, Terrence, when you've talked about this, it can be for a variety of reasons. Illness, taking care of someone in your family. Just there's so many different reasons. I think people will put their career on pause these days. Terrence, do you want to touch on that?
Absolutely, Brooke. I think my main advice for that is to totally be authentic and honest with that response, whether it was taking care of someone that might have been ill or being a stay-at-home mom. You want to be authentic with that. But I think you want to make it straight into a positive and make sure that you pull out some skills gained or traits that will be relevant to the position. So you want to always deflect it right back to your fit for the position and not really magnify the absence, but you want to magnify lessons learned or the skills gains that will be valuable to that employer. That will be my biggest advice.
Very good. Good. Well, we'll see if we can come back to some of these. I think there's just a couple more. I want to make sure we have time to finish the presentation and then open it up for more questions.
Absolutely, Brooke. Yeah, I only have a few more things here to cover, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. So why don't you just mention, everyone, we do have some interviewing resources available for alumni, and we have a way to build an elevator pitch. We have a sample interview guide with common questions for the employer, tips for attire, but it's all on our website, careers.tcu.edu. You can access them anytime. And then I'm going to also show you a quick little demo of Big Interview, which is our brand new resource for alumni to learn and practice virtually online. So that kind of wraps up our conversation, everyone. We covered a lot, from basics to virtual interview tips, but I want to talk about some action items and next steps. Now, you can actually schedule an appointment with me for a practice interview in Frog Jobs powered by Handshake. The link is below, but I do want to introduce our newest platform called Big Interview. We launched it August of this year. Alumni have their own platform, tcualumni.biginterview.com. There is an access code just for alumni to use to access the platform. It's Frogs 1873, but you'll get to learn about common questions. So there are basic questions, questions about experience level, so entry level, mid-level experience, grad school, medical school, veterans, LGBTQ questions, inappropriate questions. So there are questions for almost any industry. There are over 1,100 occupations listed there, questions about skill set. So this really takes all of the interview resources and puts them into one place for you to learn and also to practice. And if I may, to show a little bit here, I wanted to show you, this is how the platform looks here. Can everyone see that, Brooke? Just really briefly here, when you log on to your platform, tcualumni.biginterview.com, There's a couple of quick little resources here. If you go to the interview playbooks here, this is going to give you a snapshot of the types of categories of questions that are available. So someone asks about career change, we have that. Mm-hmm. And you have new graduate, we have executive positions, military veterans, overqualified. I get lots of people say, well, they think I'm overqualified. How do I handle those types of questions? There's a database, there's a written curriculum and video curriculum, and you get to practice and record your responses as well. So I'll just click on the career change questions here. Here are some of the questions you'll see on the right that might be according to that. And then the video gives you actual tips here. So I'm going to actually go to the practice section here. So this is more of the learning module, but if you want to practice, you go right to the practice session. You can go to interview roulette, which is just random questions to practice with. Answer builder for your STAR method to archive your stories. For your behavioral questions, we'll go right to our question library. I'll just go there. Here's some of the different categories. And then here are the general questions, industry, by skill, for graduate school, government, etc. So for general questions here are the different categories as well. Again, uncomfortable questions, there's inappropriate questions here. And then you have, again, admissions questions, business school, graduate school, and a lot more.
This is awesome. I love this.
So again, it's tcualumni.biginterview.com.
Good.
All righty.
We did get another question in the chat, and feel free, if you have more questions for Terrence and Rachelle, you can use the chat box or the Q&A feature as well. Let's see, someone asked about what's the best way to portray personality over Zoom? And I feel like initially, I think everybody is like, oh, I'm great in the room, you know, and how can you really make it personable when you're in a computer screen?
I mean, you know, I don't have a magic answer for that. I think it's tough. I think we've all maybe gotten better over time because we use it more often. But I would think, and it sounds so, you know, basic, but I would say, you know, smile a little bit. You don't have to be smile, because I hate when people tell women to smile all the time, but smile a little bit. Just be yourself, whatever that is. Try to have some inflection in your voice. I think because sometimes over the monitor, you want to just like be straightforward and just talk to the monitor, but have some inflection in your voice. I move around a lot. I use my hands. If you were in a room with me, I would still do the same thing I do over the computer. It seems weirder now because I'm on a computer, but I think just be sure that if you're trying to be yourself as much as possible, if you're a hand gesture person, it's not too much, but I think making sure you don't try to stiffen yourself so much where you're just, but I think let your personality shine through. You can laugh, you can make a joke if it's appropriate. Make eye contact. I think that's important as well. But I think we're all, trust me, I think the interviewees and the interviewers, we're all struggling with how do we make it seem engaging through this digital platform. I think everyone's sort of struggling in that area.
Yeah, very good. Okay, and I think someone asked Terrence about registering and logging in for the big interview tool, and he put that in the chat feature as well. Very good. We'll put there's a few more questions coming in. Yes, we will be able to provide a recording of today's presentation. Somebody asked about the slide deck. By tomorrow, you'll receive a thank you. Anybody who registered for the presentation, because I know we had a few people that registered early and life happened and now they weren't able to attend the webinar. This recording will be available on hornfrogsconnect.com, which is another resource for our alumni. This is a professional networking space just for our TCU community. We have TCU alumni, faculty, staff, and students are on the platform now, and they'll be looking for you, the alum, for your experience and guidance and the industry that you're in. And there's lots of great ways to connect there. But we'll kind of pop back over to the questions. How to keep authentic answers after receiving or after answering another, oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. So how to keep authentic answers after answering after another interviewee who kind of covered your stance. So I think the example is it's maybe a group interview. If I'm answering that or if I'm asking that question, please let me know. But if the person above you or in front of you already gave the response.
I would say it depends on the question itself. If it's a behavioral type question where examples are involved, if you can try to come up with another example or keep to the story that you have, I wouldn't say come up with something totally new, but stick with what you already had and then pull out some of those transferable skills and then emphasize the results of your actions and then how it relates to the job itself.
All right, let's see. This is a hard question someone encountered. If you get the job, how could you lose money for me?
I don't know who asked that. Who wants to lose money these days? I don't know. That's a hard one.
Yeah. Oh, here's another one related to money. What would you do if they think you would leave for more money?
I think that's one of those questions where I always say people never leave organizations just for money. They often leave their supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
So their immediate supervisors, usually why people leave a job. I think if they think you'll leave for more money, because let's say you're overqualified for a position and you're wanting to back up in your career just a bit, whether it be for a family or whatever the case may be, I think you just reiterate your commitment to doing a good job. You don't have to say, I don't want to take more money. I think you just reiterate your commitment to doing a good job and to giving them your time and that you are qualified because of X reasons, and just keep the focus there and not necessarily pinning yourself into a no thank you for money, because we'll all take a little bit more money, I think.
All right, well, we have just passed the 1 o'clock hour. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And of course, I want to thank Rachelle and Terrence for sharing your expertise. Absolutely. And all the interviewing process. We really appreciate this. And this is so timely because I think, Rachelle, you mentioned earlier, gone are the days of the phone interview. Yeah. I think we're getting more comfortable and we're just going to hop online and get in the virtual experience. And so we're really appreciative of your expertise on both of this subject matter. And we'll be posting this on hornfrogsconnect.com. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you so much.
Go Frogs.
Go Frogs.